It's really rare for all of us together at one place to talk about this particular topic in Taiwan, right? This is a very unique event. And so, 我是邱一芳 Evon Chiu. I grew up in Taipei. My father is from Taipei, my mom is from Hsinchu. My father is Taiwanese, my mom is Hakka. And I went to the United States when I was 19. So I stayed there for almost 10 years and I came back about 8 or 9 years ago. I had been working with children in Taidong at a school, but now I am a bilingual therapist. So I see clients either in Taipei, Taichung, or online, and it could be from any places you can imagine. There are a lot of international people in Taiwan. The time has changed. When I left, it was not like this before. Can you imagine? There was no Starbucks. And then when I came back, I opened my schedule, my calendar. If I have 15 sessions this week, they could be from 15 different cultures. Can you imagine that? This is Taiwan in 2024. So why are we talking about this? Because it's the story of us. It's the story of Taiwan. And so why did I want to talk about this topic? So I see clients, like Lionel mentioned, of course I have local Taiwanese clients, but I see expats here, I see Asian Americans, and Asian American, the word Asian, it could be anything you can imagine, okay? And a lot of second generation Taiwanese American. First generation usually don't come in. They'll grab their kids. And I also do telehealth. So a lot of my clients, they are in different states in the United States. It could be in Europe, South Africa, Japan, Korea, all over. So after a while, after practicing therapy in Taiwan, I noticed something. Everybody, when they're sharing their stories, there's a theme, and it keeps coming out in the session. It's cross-generational trauma. So I hear the stories, regardless of gender, race, and ethnicity. I hear this again and again and again. And then I said, wait a minute, I have to pay attention to this. And this is not what Sigmund Freud can teach us. I cannot learn anything about this on any book. So I started paying attention to this. And good thing my upbringing really helps here because I grew up in a hostel, family-style hostel. I don't know how many of you know Liu She? It's pretty much vanished. So my grandparents, they operated a Liu She in Taipei, a very poor neighborhood. And I am very thankful for that childhood because can you imagine ever since kindergarten, my after school hobby is to sit at the corner of the hostel, observing people, watching people, and listening to their stories where they are from. And this is like destiny. Now I still do that for a living. And so I hear all these stories. Now I'm doing therapy, but when I was in kindergarten, I didn't know. I didn't know this is cross-generational trauma. I just know, oh, their stories are very interesting. Schools don't teach this. I reflect back on my childhood, the stories that I heard. And the women workers in the hostel, they all brought in their life stories. And that's cross-generational trauma. That's the history of Taiwan. So doing therapy in Taiwan, we have to be conscious and aware of the development of Taiwan society and the history of Taiwan. So I'm going to talk about that today. And I want to let you know because we have to target a group. Today the focus is Taiwanese American. Okay, so I'm sorry, I cannot speak for all Asian community or all Taiwanese American, but there is a theme in my work and I'm sharing those themes, okay? But I shouldn't speak for anyone. If you find some similarities, that's great. And if you feel like, oh, this doesn't sound like my family, that's normal, okay? So I have to use my cheat sheet. I'm like a goldfish. So one of the privileges of working here with the Taiwan license is I'm not restricted by state license. Okay, so I can see clients from 50 states. That's a privilege I have here. So I have seen clients from at least more than 20 states. Taiwanese American from more than 20 states. Their stories are all different, but there are also some similarities. And I would say today the topic is about love and coming home. That's what I hear in my room every day. And I'm uniquely positioned to be in the middle, so I get to see two sides because of my upbringing and I studied history in Taiwan before I went to America. And I speak two languages, and I see two types of clients. So it's like I get to see both sides. But sometimes it's not a blessing that you see things. Now you know. How do you help them cross the bridge and to understand each other? So today there will be 3 segments. One is the first generation Taiwanese American, okay, and it has to do with the Taiwan history. And the second segment is growing up in America, so the second generation. And the third segment is coming home to Taiwan, like a lot of you. The purpose of this talk is to really realize what has happened to us. And this is important. That's the first step towards healing and rebuild. Yeah. And I need your input and feedback. You know, it could be interactive. So let me start from sharing the intersectionality trauma of the first generation. If you grew up in Taiwan before going to America, my grandparents' generation, or even my parents' generation, and you are a girl, you're female, okay? It's very likely you have been through this. Expectations from the society and the parents to behave in certain way, to take on certain responsibilities of the household chores, taking care of younger siblings, be obedient to your partners, and just to do well in school, and sometimes sacrifice school so your siblings can study, and to get married. Okay, so it was not okay for a woman to be single or not have kids for my grandparents' generation. And divorce was a shame. So today we're gonna talk about the shame, intersectionality shame. It's a lot of shame of our first generation parents. So, you know, in the old days, it was common for Taiwanese men to have 2 wives, 3 wives, or mistresses. So our grandparents, it's very common. They can have 2 families. And some of the reasons could be because my first wife cannot bear children, or I don't have a son. I need a son to carry on my first name, my last name. So it's kind of, okay, it's socially approved to find another woman so that you can have a son. So this is the first shame that women experience, is that, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot give you a son. And this is such a shame, I'm useless. And for the daughter, it's very common, they can go on to 5, 6 daughters without a son, and then the man move on to a different family, right? So the daughters will be like, sorry mom, I'm a girl. When I put you at a very difficult situation. And this daughter grows up, and they study really well, they perform really well. They try to wash out that shame. Okay, and then I moved to America, and to keep parents' pride. Okay, I'm not bad at all, I'm useful. And that could become our parents. So that's the first shame we're talking about here. And in the old days, physical punishment was widely accepted. Okay, it's okay to hit your children. And so there's a lot of domestic violence going on. And in the name of physical discipline, but it would be child abuse now. But everybody, every household, probably if this was happening, so this physical boundary was violated. And that creates a lot of sense of security issues, safety. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe at home. And for girls to be physically punished, it could cause serious trauma, especially by fathers. And divorce. Even till today, if a couple gets a divorce, usually the woman will receive more shame from the society. And in the old days, if you were a divorced woman, oh my God, don't think about finding another partner, starting another family. You have to carry that shame for the rest of your life. And your children will suffer from that shame too. Your mom and dad got a divorce. Okay, but they have to grow up, they have to survive, right? How do they survive? So this is the thing, education. Education flip life around. So for a lot of my parent generation and above, it's very, very important what school you get into, what university you graduate from. It's like a label. It becomes your last name. So like the shame they carry growing up, either as a man, as a woman, as what, second family children, if they study well and they go into Taida, Sida, they can wash out that shame and they can start enjoy that pride for the rest of their life. You graduate from Taida, you can enjoy that for the next 30 years. You can easily find a job. And people will forget, oh, you're from the second wife, or oh, you're actually a woman, you're a girl. And then if you grew up in that era as a boy, it's not a fun thing. Because think about the first generation, a lot of men, they have problem getting in touch with their emotions and feelings, and they have problem expressing them and communicating them. And that's because in the old days, boys were not allowed to cry and have emotions. That's a sign of weakness. Why are you crying? That's a shame. So the shame they grew up, oh, crying is a shame. Feeling vulnerable is a shame. I'm not allowed to cry. And even worse, they have this military service. Before, every boy, every man had to go serve in the military for 3 years. And sometimes they go to Jinmen, they go to Mazu, and they don't come home in 3 years. They just stay there for 3 years. And you know, there's a lot of things happening in the military service. We don't know what happened, but there's a lot of trauma there happened to men. But it's an honor to serve your country. So even if they talk about that, no one will pay attention to that trauma. And so a lot of them grew up with a lot of trauma, repressed feelings, repressed sadness and hurt. But the funny thing is, they are allowed to express anger in the Taiwanese society. So a lot of men's sadness and grief were expressed in the form of anger, even till now. So working with male client and female client, I have to really pay attention to their anger. Is it really anger? So we talk about families, birth order. Okay, birth order matters a lot. If you're firstborn and you're a boy, okay, one thing is you have a lot of responsibility. But you might get more inheritance. There's a firstborn privilege, but a lot of times firstborns, they suffer a lot. Taiwan went through poverty. So that was a poverty trauma our grandparents and parents suffered. Growing up, being poor, okay? Like in a household, they had to grow their own vegetables, and 2 siblings share 1 egg. And you don't have salt, you don't have meat. You have to use something to exchange. So they were constantly hungry, basic human needs. So they would not want to experience that again in adulthood. They would try anything they can to get out of poverty. And there was an economic boom in Taiwan, the 60s, 70s, and up to 80s. There was a lot of trauma in that era. The stock market trauma, and a lot of people who grew up poor, and all of a sudden they're making a lot of money. But sometimes they are very naive. They don't understand the business game, okay? And they can go bankrupt. They can get into fraud. People steal their money. All kinds of these things happened. But no one is talking about this as trauma. It would be, oh, it just happened. It just happened. And then it's the same for everyone. So suck it up. You have to get up and move on. So our grandparents and parents, they're very used to this. Suck it up, get up, move on, move on, move on. So what is their therapy? Because they don't go to therapy. So what is their therapy? It's like the biggest addiction country, workaholic. They work, they don't rest, and they don't spend money. They just work, 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 and they don't take vacations. Why go to a restaurant to eat at home? It's a survival mentality. And oftentimes I see them, they bring it to America. Even they have a stable job, okay, they're comfortable now. They still hold that mentality, and they pass on to the children. And the children will be like, weird, why are we living like this? Why? But no one would tell them it's trauma, it's cross-generational trauma. Poverty is a trauma for Taiwanese. But people are like, oh, it's in our history, it's our blood, and everybody grew up poor, it's normal. But it's not. So education. Education in Taiwan is the biggest source of trauma. Up till now, today, every day I still see this in the therapy room. You know, Taiwan has this 100分的文化, 100 points. You have to get 100. It's not ABCD, it's 0 to 100, right? So I thought it was when I was growing up, it was like that. But now I still hear the stories a lot. If you get a 95, it's not good. It's not good enough. Why did you miss that 5 points? What happened? Let's look at that 5 points. What is missing? And don't overlook that mentality. Okay, this 5-point missing mentality, they carry on to work, their marriage, their parenting, and themselves. So I see a lot of clients that come in, they cannot get rid of that feeling. I am not good enough. It's just not good enough, okay? So in therapy, we talk about progress. Oh, we made a lot of progress. I see you change a lot. You make a lot of progress. They cannot take compliments, acknowledgement. No, immediately you'll be like, but there's still areas of improvement. I still haven't resolved this and that and that. And let's move on, work on that. Okay, so it's like they're constantly running towards somewhere. Even when they move to another country, they still have that. So you can see the first generation, how hard they work. And standardized test. Almost all the first generation went through standardized test culture, which means there's always an answer for everything, and the teacher is always right. And you should memorize the textbook, you should memorize what the teacher says. That impacts the entire generation. I think also they impact the competitiveness of Taiwan. Always searching for an answer. So even when they come to therapy, we'll be like, I need your advice. what's your advice? What's your tip on this? How can I resolve my parent-child relationship issues? Okay, and if you let them know, therapists don't provide advice, and then it will be like, why should I pay you? So standardized test, it's a trauma, educational shame. Okay, it really matters in Taiwan what grades you get, the ranking of your school. It does matter a lot, and public and private. In Taiwan, higher ranking schools are mostly public, okay? So when they get together, neighbors or relatives get together during Chinese New Year, they'll be like, oh, what school your child goes to, right? It's a public school. Wow. 建中北一女. Wow, you did a good job. But it's like a private school, vocational school. It's not academic, it's vocational. They'll be like, oh, okay. You're a good-looking child. You're good at sports. So this is the opposite. Okay, so in Taiwanese schools, PE classes, art classes, music classes, they're considered irrelevant. And what's the most important class? Maybe Chinese, English, math. Things that will get you into a good college. Okay, but when they immigrate to America, it's sometimes the opposite. What sports club do you join? What instrument can you play? And the creativity piece, okay, it's not in the Taiwanese education. So when they go study abroad, oftentimes there's this culture shock. What do you mean critical thinking? What do you mean my idea, my creativity, my own perspective? What does that mean? They will never suffer in the first few years. I suffered too, because I was not used to that. But you know, Asian children, they're good at testing. They can quickly adapt, get used to that, and the next year they get straight A. Okay, but what's missing here is the shame. It's a shame they carry. I'm not good enough. So a lot of first generation, they immigrated to the US carrying this shame and I cannot fail. They're so scared to fail. They only learn how to be number one, but no one walked them through failure. They cannot fail, just imagine that. And there is no emotional education, not at all, for my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, because all you had to do was to study, go into good school, get a good job. No one talk about EQ or emotional intelligence, how to resolve conflict. It's a doing culture, not a being culture. So the thing is, they carry this shame. They go to a foreign land, right? They feel small, either consciously, unconsciously. They feel not enough, they feel small. And the thing is, when the parent feels small, sometimes the children will feel small too. And that shame can pass on through generations. So I was participating at a training, and we had to lead this role plays. And the leaders of the groups, they had a meeting and they were exchanging what was happening in their groups. And one of the leaders said, you know, I was so timid, I was so nervous, I don't think I qualified to be a leader, so I was so shy and afraid of giving them advice and giving them guidance. And after a while, the members told me, you know, if you are small, we are small too. So you have to have your voice and speak up. So voice is the thing. In Taiwanese education, it's very unified. They encourage you to not be different. They encourage you to be the same. Wear the uniform outside and inside. And it's okay. They want you to be the same, and they don't encourage you to challenge the teachers or the textbook. And they don't encourage students to have a voice and speak up. So it's cross-generational because now when I have online trainings for therapists, okay, they're already licensed therapists, they don't turn on their camera, they don't talk. It's trauma. Because last time when they talked, what happened? Humiliated. What kind of question was that? Okay, how can you have this feeling? No other kids are having the same feeling. Why do you have a problem? Okay, so not having a voice does impact therapy a lot, because therapy is all about self and identity. Okay, so we run into this situation, we have to pay attention to cross-generational trauma. So I grew up in the hostel, right? So I heard all the stories about the first generation, my grandparents' generation. So the two events impact immigrant families a lot. One is the World War II, 1949, the transition of Taiwan. It didn't go so well. There was no transition. So this is the thing. There is a silent population, our grandparents' population. A big portion of the Taiwanese population, after 1949, their education got interrupted and taken away. Okay, for example, they used to go to the Japanese elementary school or middle school, and all of a sudden they cannot go because they changed the language and the different teachers. Okay, they don't speak the language. They have to relearn the language. And some, because of the war, they don't get to go to school. They don't get to continue school. They have to go work to raise the younger siblings. So there's a huge, especially females, illiterate. They don't, okay, first of all, if they spoke Japanese, they don't use it here now. Or if they didn't speak Japanese, they spoke Taiwanese or Hakka or Aboriginal languages, but now everybody, the official language is Mandarin. And they cannot read and write, but they have to raise children. So this is a very parentified country, parentified child country. Parentified child is a term describing you're supposed to be a child, but you have to grow up prematurely to take care of your parents because they don't speak Mandarin. They cannot go see a doctor. You have to translate for them. What your teacher is saying, they don't understand. You need to translate for your parents. So like grandparents and our parents' generation, they were all parentified child. Huge generation, just imagine that. But second generation Taiwanese American also grew up parentified. It's in different countries. So that language is a shame in Taiwan. So after 1949, if you don't speak Mandarin, it's a shame. And if you speak Mandarin with an accent, it's a shame. And how bad is the accent? Particularly on social media, even till now, they still laugh at people who speak Taiwanese Mandarin. And so, and ethnicity too. So our parent generation, a lot of people, they had to hide to survive. They had to hide their ethnicity. Okay, skin color they cannot hide. They had to hide their accent, pretend. So they have to speak Mandarin all the time. And some Hakka people, they have to speak Taiwanese to pretend, to survive. So ethnicity is a shame for our parents' generation. But they go to school, everybody speaks Mandarin, and they might go to very good school and they study abroad. They can hide this part, but don't overlook the shame they carry with them. If they speak Hakka at home, their parents only spoke Taiwanese. That's a shame they hide with them. So ethnicity and language is huge and big. And then 1979, right? America announced One China policy. They only acknowledge China. So there's a big immigration wave during that time or after that. The One China policy. So a lot of people immigrated to America during that time. out of insecurity and rootless. So it's immigration out of fear to begin with. So it's another survival mindset. They have to start all over in a foreign land. So it's difficult to be a parent, actually. If you immigrate out of that reason, and you have to start all over in a foreign land, in a foreign language, it's extremely difficult. And you can imagine why there's all kinds of conflict. So if we talk about the attachment style in psychology, right? And we look at Taiwan as the parents. So for our parent generation, there are three kinds of parents. The parent who would abandon us or leave us, or they would just disappear overnight, like Japan. They just disappeared. And the second parent is, oh, okay, your parents can change overnight. Like yesterday, our family spoke Japanese, and today we're gonna speak Mandarin. Everybody speak Mandarin. So you can have a Chinese parent overnight. And the third kind of parents, you have heard of 228 and white terror? Okay. Parents are not safe. Parents can hurt us. Parents would hurt us. So that creates a lot of anxiety and sense of insecurity and fear in Taiwanese people. Our generation, not so much, but my parent generation, yes. Just imagine the atmosphere. It's not safe to speak your heart. It's not safe to reveal your identity. It's not safe to reveal your accent. So they grew up in that insecure atmosphere. So what did they do to survive? Study. And that's why a lot of first generations, they really care about education. But they go through this trauma, right? They go through this trauma. How do they heal from the trauma? Of course, they won't go to a therapist. The therapist might be unsafe too. They might not understand their struggle. So how do parents know they're doing a good job? The first generation. How do they know they're doing a good job? Parents need encouragement too and validation. But how? How do they get that? No one would tell them, you are doing a great job. Wow. See how much you have accomplished in a foreign land. So the only evidence they can use is what school my child goes to, and what job, what profession, and do we have a house, and we live in what kind of house. They become unwantingly very materialistic. Okay, and that's a trend. A lot of first generation, but that's from trauma. So when they immigrated to America, okay, it's trauma on both first generation and second generation. The first generation parents, a lot of people overlook this on the social media, on YouTube or other social medias. They make all kinds of funny videos about like Taiwanese parents like speaking funny English with funny accent. They were made fun of on social media, the way they speak English. It's humiliating to anyone. But what's the first generation's reaction? A lot of them keep silent. They minimize it. But how would you feel if someone make fun of your speaking? That's humiliating. And also the effect on the second generation. Your classmates or people on the street are making fun of your parents' English. How do you feel? And it's very difficult for the second generation to form a sense of pride of their identity, who they are. A sense of pride or our family has good heritage, good education, we're doing well, it's a good family, I'm proud of I'm very proud for being who I am. It's very difficult for them to form that at a young age. And sometimes it's confusing. Okay, so when the media is making fun of what your parents eat, why are you eating fish heads and chicken feet? The smell of the food, the color of the food, or how they celebrate holidays, what they wear, the color of their shirt. isn't that trauma? Isn't it trauma? But for a lot of second generation, if you grow up in like Ohio, Kentucky, Oklahoma, and you're like the only Taiwanese family there, how does a child make sense of all this? And then how difficult it is for them to go to school and get teased, okay, and they go home and the parents get teased too, and the parents just tell them, just study hard, okay, don't argue, don't create conflict, we want to make it. How do they comprehend all this? Okay, so it's very confusing for a lot of second generation. Self-concept and efficacy of the first generation. First of all, it's very difficult to raise your children in a foreign country and that you are a minority and marginalized group. And they rarely have support and validation. But they are used to it because they grew up without it. So they just go, where they work hard, okay? And they hope that by working hard, they will make it and the children are gonna be okay. So when children are going through like bullying and racism at school, because this happens so widely, a lot, microaggression, the parents might sound minimizing their experiences. Or just 不要管这个, okay, it's okay, 没关系, move on, study. It's difficult for the parents because they move there either to go to graduate school or to work. They don't go through grade school. They don't go through this identity evolvement, right? So it's difficult for the first generation to comprehend what their children are going through at school every single day. And it's a very lonely experience for the second generation. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here. Let us process. Okay, there's a lot of information. So I want to know, what speaks to you? What does it remind you of? And how do you feel right now? Yes, and do we have another microphone or? Sorry, we want people to be able to hear clearly. So we'll give you a microphone. All the way in the back. Okay.
Thank you so much for giving a voice to my inner child. I grew up, I'm actually Korean American, but I grew up in New Jersey to first generation immigrant parents, and I think everything you just shared really hits the nail on how lonely and hard it was to grow up. And I think I'm 31 years old now, and I've actually, gone back to live in Korea, learn the language. I've lived in Taiwan and learned Chinese, and I've had a change of heart. I think in my late 20s and early 30s, I actually feel a great sense of pride, a great sense of confidence, a great sense of getting in touch with a sort of motherland or heritage. And I think there is a new narrative now that we have access to, which is that Asia is rising, that China and Taiwan and Korea are major economies and major cultural forces. And I'm actually part of a WeChat group called Journey to the East, Dongyoji, and it's about coming to Asia as an Asian American. And so I just feel a lot of hope, kind of despite the trauma.
Yes.
We have achieved a lot. We're the 14th largest economy in Taiwan or the 11th largest economy in Korea, due to the hard work, due to the sacrifices, and kind of overcoming some of that humiliation. And so I guess my question for you is there anything that we can do in a educational system or a cultural movement where we can equip the next generation to feel a sense of pride, to have an alternative to the whatever Western majority culture that we're tasked to try to adapt to? Have you seen any optimism or any hope in the next generation?
Oh, that's a great question. I do. I do see hope in the next generation. Gen Z, actually, in Taiwan, they're very hopeful. The curriculum has changed in Taiwan. So Gen Z, when they were growing up, the curriculum, high school, middle school curriculum, they study a lot of history of Taiwan. Okay, so and standardized test is changing. Not to say their pressure is less, but it's definitely better than the previous generations. People care, young people, they, because this gender equality and same-sex marriage movement in Taiwan, a lot of young people have this concept of cultural equity, not just gender, but equity, this concept. And they are curious. They care about who their classmates are, people next to them who are Taiwanese now. So they are sensitive, and they grew up with social media, with the internet, very open-minded. So I do feel very hopeful. And Taiwanese people are very creative, very, very adaptive, resilient. Okay, we talk about trauma. They went through all this trauma, but the point is, it didn't crash them. It didn't crash them. Instead, it made them stronger. Taiwanese people are very strong, very resilient. Of course, they are very hardworking. It's in our blood. But under any circumstances, they can make it. They're gonna make it. And educational system is changing because now young people, not 100% of young people, they buy it. Oh, I have to go to a good college, name a higher ranking college or get a PhD. No, but some people, they know what they want at a very young age. So that diploma culture is changing. People, not necessarily they would praise the academia or praise people who have a higher degree, not necessary for the success in their professions anymore. And people are very creative, young people are very creative. So if anybody that you have any other perspectives to share, welcome to voice out. But that was a very good question.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. I'm half Taiwanese, my mom is from Taiwan. And I'm getting the thing where I get really small in front of people, so I apologize if I'm really shy. So a few years ago, I interviewed my mom for a writing piece, and I asked her a lot about her childhood and growing up here, and it's really amazing because she echoed basically everything that you've said today, and she used the word shame so many times.
Wow.
Yeah, I get really emotional thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's just really incredible how much she has carried and her generation has carried and has kind of passed down to me. I can really feel all the shame from her when I was a child, and that's really why I asked her all of these questions. So I'd really love to hear your perspective. I've been fortunate enough to come across a lot of healing modalities that I can use for my own healing, but my mom doesn't really have that privilege. So I'm just wondering, what would you say to our generation to help support our parents?
Wow. 那应该是很多小孩的心声。You speak a lot of our heart. Yes. And that's the reality, that's true. It's a different generation, right? So they wouldn't ask for help. They wouldn't admit there's a problem in the family. They wouldn't admit vulnerability. It's very common. I think instead of hoping they will come to therapy, let's try to have an open-minded mentality. is allow them to have their space of healing and how they heal. They might have been healing all their life, just not in our own ways. Maybe raising a good daughter like you is healing for them. And maybe just sharing that shame with you is healing. And she doesn't need to pay someone to do that. So to heal through expressing your feelings and emotions is it's educational privilege. 这个要怎么说呢? You know, the intersectionality, it's middle class concept. It's a higher people who have higher education. It's their belief and value. Okay, but we have to, you know, have this cultural humility. And for certain generations and people, that's not the way they heal. But that doesn't mean they're not healing. Okay, so narrative approach is very, very good with old people. They like to share their stories, and it's more comforting. It's lighter. It's not as intense. And they like to talk about their stories to young people. So like a lot of my colleagues, they do senior counseling. It's not the traditional, you know, one-on-one, you sit in the couch in a small, tiny little room and I diagnose you, I analyze you, I treat you. No, it's not like that. But instead, I'm curious about your story and I want to hear your story. Tell me about your story. It's just like that. So it reminds me of my childhood, sitting at the corner of the hostel, just listening to their stories. And that's their therapy. So I remember all the female workers, 那些阿姨 in the hostel, during their break, they would just sit there and they complain about their husband, they talk about their childhood trauma. And now I think of it, it's their therapy session. Yeah. So don't feel bad if your parents never go to therapy. I believe by this age they have adopted some mechanism, otherwise they wouldn't have been here. They are stronger and more resilient than we think. However, touching upon their weaknesses and vulnerability is against their survival mechanism. They have to be independent, strong, and tough, and that's their crutch. So instead of taking that crutch away, we can have a more open-minded heart. Yes?
So I apologize earlier, I don't know what happened. Yeah, I wanted to kind of respond to what you were saying too, and just to contribute. I've been on this roots journey myself in Taiwan for like 10, 15 years, and I didn't know it was a roots journey when I began. I've noticed that there's two things I wanted to kind of like share. Is like, one is I noticed that when I started to really heal myself, I didn't even have to, like, you don't need to do anything or persuade your parents to do anything, you know, that you would do, but just your own healing and your own shift in presence. Like, I used to have a terrible relationship with my mom, for example, right? And I think over the last decade plus, you know, just me healing myself, I realized I had a lot of biases and a lot of cultural perceptions, you know, ways that we've been acculturated in the US, that things have to be this way or that way is correct, and therefore my mom or whoever is wrong, you know, all these things, right? And oh, she doesn't love me, blah, blah, blah. Like, you just have certain frameworks for how do you view love, or how do you know, so I think once I really got deep with myself, and, you know, I think, yeah, she started changing, and like, I don't know if it was, but it was like, you know, relationships are dynamic and fluid, right? So I think it's like an energetic kind of thing, you know? And then the second thing I wanted to say is like, I started my journey getting involved in counseling, and then I started studying coaching, and so now I'm a coach. these are very Western methods. And I want to say I used to look down on like Shen Xingling, or which is like the spiritual, you know how there's various spiritual practices in Asia and Taiwan. Because I didn't understand it, I was like, you know, I was Christian briefly in college and all this stuff. So I was like very Western, right? And I think, anyway, I've had the opportunity to learn from a spiritual master here. I didn't know she was a spiritual master when I first met her, but, and so I've kind of learned Shen Xingling as well. And I do think that certain elders, right, maybe they don't use Western therapy, right? That's not their way, but they have like maybe the narrative session that you mentioned, Evon, or they have their own way, like they go in, you know, not necessarily a fortune tell, but some sort of Eastern practices that I do think help too, and I think go hand in hand. So with therapy or psychology. So yeah, just wanted to.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing. Very precious. Then you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. I just realized I was going to take this in a totally
Okay.
different direction.
It's okay.
No, I was so entranced by what everyone was sharing. So I know, I feel like a lot of people say Asian Americans aren't a monolith, and I also feel like Taiwanese Americans aren't a monolith. There are people who grew up as a minority, and some people who grew up, okay, well, I grew up in Massachusetts in a really white town. I was so envious of the Taiwanese Americans that grew up in California. In my head, like, oh, you have friends. But I learned later on it's not necessarily like everything is much easier and golden.
Yeah.
But I was curious in your experiences if you've noticed any differences or similarities between Taiwanese Americans who grew up, you know, maybe in Ohio versus in a place where there were a lot of Taiwanese Americans.
That's a very good question, because they are all different. Even the same state. I have heard horrible stories from a suburb in California or in New York too. Even Buffalo, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, there's racism, there's discrimination, there's bullying. It could be anywhere, but
I suppose my question is, like I had a friend who grew up in a town, or it was 99% Asian, mostly Chinese American.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, what is that experience like?
Yes. It's a different form of loneliness. I can only say that. But if we talk about the concept of self, the true self, people who grow up that being the only Asian, it's inevitable. A lot of times they have to try very hard to prove something. And sometimes they have to fake their identity. If they are tiny, they don't like sports, they have to join the football team to build up their body. So I'm like you. No one can hurt me. I'm strong. I'm big. I like sports. They have to fake I like sports. Or they have to speak fluent English, white English. Sometimes, even when they are dating, they have to get trophy women to prove themselves. I'm good enough like you. I'm capable. And when they go into the workforce, a lot of them say, regardless of cities, they have to work triple hard to prove they are confident of the same job. They are competent. So it's an imaginary ceiling, but it's not imaginary. It's real at the same time. It's like, is it really about effort and who you are? Or it's about skin color? It's the same thing. But I would say people who grew up with like in a town that has more Taiwanese immigrants, they have more resources. They feel not as alone, especially during holidays or childcare. They can share. And people who come back to Taiwan reconnect with their roots more often. Okay, it might be better. Okay, to at least know, oh, there's another identity of me out there. I'm not crazy. I'm not weird, right? But I've met some people who grew up in a white town and then never came back to Taiwan until recent years. That could be 20 years of lonely experience. Nobody to talk to. But I have to say, when they come back to Taiwan, they're very resilient and adaptive. It's amazing. So I was gonna talk about this, right? So can I keep going? Okay. So the second generation, this is about parent-child relationship. So a lot of them grew up parentified because of language. Okay, so who helped them with school? 生涯规划. Okay, which university to apply? What should I study? So at that age, I have heard some resentment from second generation. When I needed you the most, all my friends had their parents and they had tutors, they had this and that. And you couldn't help me with anything applying for schools. And I just feel so lonely. But at the same time, there is an inner conflict. Oh, but I don't want to blame my parents. They don't want this too, right? So this would be very conflicting for the second generation. And especially when a lot of first generations, they are very hardworking, they're very busy, and they hold on to the survival mindset. So they don't focus on emotional nourishment or emotional communication. So the second generation is, a lot of times they would feel this conditional love. And this is a threat. What if I don't go to the best school in the state? Will you still love me the same? What if I marry a kindergarten teacher? Would you still like me the same? Or if I want to be a hairdresser, would you be proud of me? So a lot of times, okay, some parents would say, I will love you the same. But second generation, they will always have this insecurity and doubt. No, I don't think you will look at me the same. So this, I would say, if you grew up in a white town, it's going to be more difficult for you to form that identity about who you are and what your parents want, how your parents look at you, because you have no comparison. You're the only sample. And it's very confusing sometimes. And so this is the thing. The first generation over time, 他们很崇洋, because they move here for a reason. America is better. White people are better. They will even say that. I would prefer you marry a white person. That's why we immigrated here. Yes. So now the ethnic relation in the U.S. and you will see the difference between the first generation and second generation, their reaction towards racism and this conflict. Because for the first generation, this is against their self-actualization process. I worked so hard all my life to overcome this shame. I have accomplished. I brought you up in this foreign country. I sent you to UC Berkeley and Yale. You are an accountant. You're an engineer. And yes, and why does that matter? Like, white people laugh at you. And for them, it's difficult for them to touch upon this issue because it's gonna shaken their survival mechanism. They have made it. And if to acknowledge racism, first of all, they didn't grow up with that voice and confidence. Okay, so it's difficult for them to speak up for themselves and to be proud of their skin color. Okay, so it's like very vulnerable to begin with in this battle. And second of all, it's a life project to come to this point. So they don't want to give it up and say, sorry, American dream crashed. That'll be the end of their dream. So, but for the second generation, it's very painful and hurtful. And my parents, they don't understand what I'm going through. Yes. Pseudo-independence and toughness. So the second generation, because they are parentified, they have to be independent. It's not a choice. But then identity-wise, they will form this pseudo-identity. Everybody appears to be very tough and independent and smart and competent and capable, right? Taiwanese Americans are very smart and capable. But sometimes that's pseudo-identity because they have to survive and sometimes they have to protect their parents, especially in a white town. So that's something that we work on in the therapy room to really reconnect them to their core self and their true self. And yeah, but it's a process. It's a process. So when they return to Taiwan, this is another story. This could create new wounds, okay? Of course, people report feeling happier, moving back to Taiwan and more comfortable, okay? But what do they have to go through? A lot of Taiwanese Americans, when they come back, they have to go through this. Your Mandarin has an accent. Therefore, you are American. Your English is so good. You're American. You're not like us. And so when they get on a taxi ride, where are you from? So this is like another identity crisis. It's hurtful because once again, you feel not fully accepted. You don't feel alone. You don't feel belong. You don't feel belong. So, but Taiwanese people, they're very direct, right? They might say it out of like a impulse. Okay, they say what they see, but they don't know this could hurt people's feelings. And Taiwanese people think very black and white. They don't have this concept of spectrum. They think language ability is identity. And there's only black and white identity. Either you are Taiwanese or American. And if you don't speak Mandarin, you're American. So no spectrum concept that would make second generation, when they come back to start their new life, they have to be very mentally strong to get through this. And again, they're gonna see this. Even though, okay, white privilege is not as much here in Taiwan, okay, because there are not that many white people. Population is different, demographics different. But if they go teach English at HES, for example, and they could see all the white colleagues are getting hired like instantly. And because you're Filipino or you are Taiwanese, and then do you speak English? And is English your native language? And the pay, the salary, okay? So this really happens. There's a salary difference. If you're a white person or a Taiwanese American, there is a salary difference. So they have to go through this. They have to see this. Why are we discriminating Asian in our own land? This is weird. So they could be re-traumatized. Okay, for people who don't speak Mandarin, it's gonna be another tough journey. To be doubted, to be challenged. Like, who are you? How come you don't speak Mandarin? But, yeah. How do you, later on you guys can talk, how do you feel when people doubt your language ability here? And switching profession, okay, so when they come here, a lot of them, they were lawyers, doctors, they oftentimes have to do something else in the beginning. It's not easy to transfer their profession here. So I would say they're very resilient because not everyone enjoys teaching English, even a lot of them do. But it's like as if that's the only job I can do here, and that's my intelligence, my capability is like that. But that's not who they are. English teacher is not who they really are. And doing business here, okay. Even with wealthy families, their parents have a business here, and you would think they are privileged. They can just go have a job and be a manager, be the CEO, right? Oh, it's very challenging to the second generation because the business culture is completely different. Everything is about 关系, unspoken rules, and there's no critical thinking, and there's no logic, and there's overwork everywhere, underpay everywhere. So they have to go through this. Like, why are we doing things like that here? But that's the culture, that's the atmosphere. But a lot of times they really want to prove to their parents, I can take care of your business, I can succeed here. That's another form of filial piety. They want to give back. But for a lot of second generation, financially, it's very difficult for them to give back and to perform better than their parents because the economic time is different now. So usually we would see the first generation is wealthier than the second generation, and the second generation, especially men, they really want to prove something. They want to take care of their parents, and they would tell me, I want them to rest and retire. I can take care of them. They're so stingy with money, they don't take vacations, and they don't buy things. I want them to be able to feel comfortable spending their money. But then later on they'll find out, even if they make more money, the parents will still be stingy. It's just in their blood. But here, this frustration. I want to give back. My parents sacrificed a lot for me, but I cannot take care of them, and they are financially taking care of me. Especially for a lot of male Taiwanese Americans, 那是一个新生. And inheritance. Okay, this is a very weird thing about Taiwanese culture. If you're from a wealthy family, inheritance is a matter. So it's very common in Taiwan. You have to listen to your father, otherwise you won't get your inheritance. And that doesn't make sense to a lot of American grown Taiwanese American. Why does it have to do with inheritance? Which is communicating. And so this is the parallel communication. When the second generation is talking about emotional needs, right? I want you to respond to my feelings. But the first generation would talk about, didn't I pay for your college tuition? Didn't I sacrifice enough for you to have what you have now? Why are you complaining? So they would use material possession, material accomplishment to respond to the second generation's emotional needs. But it's a parallel process, because they're talking about different things. But the emotional need, it's not the first generation's concept. They just don't get it. What do you mean acknowledge your anger and resentment, acknowledge your hurt? And for them, it's like they're being criticized and blamed. I sacrificed for you, so you should not complain. You should minimize this resentment. 不要跟我计较. Yeah, it's their logic and concept. But American trend, American educated children, they would have to, across the cultural bridge, to understand why their parents are talking like that. And okay, 孝顺 depends on personality and birth order. Okay, not all the siblings have that concept of filial piety. Maybe sometimes firstborn would have more of that. So when that kicks in, right, it's very conflicting. Because on one side, my parents did pay for my education. And growing up, I didn't have, compared to my white counterpart, I didn't have to worry about student loan. I didn't have to worry about having anything. I have everything I need. I can even start my career here in Taiwan. I don't have to worry about that. But it's that 孝顺. Now, I would like to hear your concept about 孝顺, your understanding and concept about 孝顺. What does that mean to you? Okay, so in therapy, they will go through this struggle. 我想要孝顺, I really want to 孝顺. But at the same time, 我做不到, 我好痛苦. I feel like I should be understanding of their struggles. 我要孝顺. But at the same time, I feel it's unfair. How come I'm always the adult in this relationship? Why do I have to be the adult? So they will go through that, 我不想要当 adult. And they could go through years of that. It's unfair. Why me? Why do I have to be the adult? You are the parent. Okay. This is a second generation struggle. But I have to say that resiliency, the second generation has, and also the possibilities. Okay, this is very inspiring. When they come to Taiwan, I am amazed again and again how quickly they can learn a language, a culture, and they can really just get into that workplace culture just like that. And it's not easy if you think about it. You grew up in a white town in America, and now you have to work in a traditional Taiwanese company. How difficult is that? But most of them, they make it. And they wouldn't use their privilege here. A lot of times they don't speak English. That's what I admire about them. They would rather sound stupid than abusing their privilege. Flexibility with their career. It's amazing. Maybe they were a doctor and now they're teaching English. It's how flexible they are. Their inner strength they have. They can overcome a lot of challenges and difficulties here. And a lot of times they feel more accepted though, or accepted here as a human being or as an Asian. And I have to say, the education that you got, your parents worked so hard for you to have, it's not completely valueless. You do have very good education. And don't overlook that critical thinking skill you have. That a lot of Taiwanese people don't have. So, very good education the second generation have, and they come back. So there's a lot of possibilities for them. And that desire, a lot of them tell me, I just want peace. I don't want this chaos anymore. I want peace in my life. I want to make peace with myself, with my parents, with my story, and I want to move on. So I would say this is a journey about becoming your congruent self and complete self. And this is beautiful to witness. So second generation, I feel hopeful because of this resiliency. Yeah, okay, we're gonna pause here and then let you guys talk. Yes.
I kind of forgot what I was gonna say. So I'll let, if anyone else has something.
Hello. So I'm thinking about my nephew, who's a third generation, and he's like 12, and I just saw him. So I feel like I got to really connect with him. He grew up in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. He's growing up in Cleveland, Ohio.
I'm very sure he's not my client. Don't worry.
No, it's not. But I wonder about that all the time. Like, what does growing up in Ohio have like an effect on him? And something funny, or maybe a little bit inappropriate, that I want to share is, like, he has a lot of African American friends, and apparently they like wrote him a contract saying that he could say the N-word. But I think he also experiences like a lot of shame, like just bringing Asian lunch, like he wants Lunchables, like he wants sandwiches, all that. Yeah, but he also is adapting, like the African American culture, I think specifically in Ohio, into his repertoire. or whatever, you know? And I actually find that quite rich. Like, I feel like it's a different kind of like Taiwanese American that, I don't know, like I think it's kind of dope to see. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I think another person raised his hand.
Hi. So much of I was frantically taking notes because I have the memory of a goldfish. Yeah. So everything you said from the beginning to the end just like resonated so deeply with me. I have so many questions, but from the very beginning, like I grew up for like over a decade. I like hid the existence of a second family from the world basically because I was told that like letting the world know of their existence would bring shame upon my family. So it's what you said earlier. My mother called it one country, two systems, which I thought was kind of funny, but you know, that's just how we cope, I guess. But I think there's a going sort of running joke in my family that like men have gotten iteratively improving, like the earlier generations of the iPhone. And so like my great grandpa was very physically abusive and would chase my grandpa around the house with a knife. My grandpa was very verbally abusive towards my grandma and my dad, and my dad has done none of those things but has like his fair share of like trauma, and so now like me, I'm working through all that, right? And I guess like so like last week I got in my dad's car and said, sit down, we're talking about our feelings today. And what I'm wondering is like, I think I've been like on this path of trying to figure out how to be generationally better, or figuring out how to undo the way that patriarchy has harmed me and like all the men in my family. But I guess what I've been wondering is there's so many resources out there for men to reckon with this of other races and backgrounds, but I see next to nothing, next to no roadmap for how to exist as an Asian man in like American and Taiwanese society today. And I'm just wondering, like you mentioned earlier about working with male clients and men, like what's that process been like, and like what resources have you come up with or exist right now? Because it feels really lonely right now.
Yeah, it is lonely, but I want everybody to notice one thing. You are speaking right now, so it's already changed. You are different from your father's generation already. You're living proof. Okay, so my clients, they come in, a lot of them between the age of 25 to 35. They talk about emotions. They cry. They do. So I have hope on the younger generation. Yes. And for the older generation, don't be pessimistic, because old men, they need different way to connect with their son and their families. Like I have a client say, my dad and I just smoke together in a room. He watches YouTube, I watch my YouTube. We just smoke. 那是我们的默契. And if they want, they can go deep into a conversation. That's how men connect. And sometimes they don't have to talk. Yeah, just like your dad and you, that's already a change, right? Yeah, but I have to say in the therapy room, I'm seeing a lot of generational changes. Nowadays, it's not necessarily female are more sensitive in the room, or they talk more about their feelings. Sometimes men have emotional needs and they are not shy expressing them. So, because I see couples, a lot of times it's the male who's talking about feelings. So gender, especially in Taipei nowadays, flipping around. Yes. Taiwan is very progressive in this aspect. Anyone want to share?
Yeah, so my mom is Taiwanese, I'm half Taiwanese, and she immigrated to the US when she was about 6. So I guess that makes me like 2nd and a half generation or 3rd generation. I don't really know. But yeah, I guess something I wanted to share, which is kind of related to everything we've been talking about, is I guess on the topic of the Taiwanese culture, upbringing, really fearing emotional vulnerability and like nourishment. That's something that my mom and I have talked a lot about. And she shared with me how growing up, not once did she hear either of her parents tell her that they loved her.
Yeah.
And I think that when she told me that, it was really surprising because I grew up in a household where I did hear my mom and I heard my dad tell me that they loved me. And that was an intentional decision on my mom's part, because as she grew up, she recognized how much that hurt her, or how much that affected her not hearing that. And you know, I'm incredibly grateful that I did grow up in a household where that was normal to me. But another thing that I've come to witness since coming here, I've been here for, I guess, about 4 months now. And my grandfather lives in Tainan. And my mom, when she was probably in her 20s or in her 30s, she told me that she started making an intentional effort to tell her parents that she loved them, even though they didn't ever say it back. And something that I've come to notice is my grandfather still doesn't tell my mother that he loves her, but he tells me and he tells my brother that he loves us. And so I think it is kind of like it's a really beautiful story of like how there can be a sort of like trickle effect when you do open up and when you do like heal within yourself, that like the people around you like may then become receptive to that.
It's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
If no one else, has questions, I have questions.
Okay, sure.
I have 2 questions, if you have time.
Yes.
Thank you. One is, I'm curious about the people who didn't come back. Like I have a lot of friends that Taiwanese American friends that don't come back, right? Even my brother, for example. I'm curious, like, what kinds of people come back? Do you know what I mean? And this is related to my second question in a way, which is about 1.5 generation versus second generation, right? I myself consider myself a 1.5 generation, even though I went to the States when I was 1.5, but I didn't speak English until I started school. And also my parents, I think, expected us to come back during when I was a kid, so they worked on my Chinese, so they didn't care about my English. It's a different background. So yeah, I'm just curious, like to give you an example in my own experience, like I actually think, so I cannot fathom the second generation problems, here, because I don't have the same, I speak Chinese fluently, right? However, when I was working in a marketing company, when I was in marketing at a company, there was a second generation colleague, let's just say, and I felt like people respected her. I should say there's a privilege that's attached to the accent, the American accent. Like, I'm sure there are challenges about fitting in, but I almost feel like they thought her English was better because our job was to market to the States or market abroad, right? So just because I spoke Chinese fluently, I feel like they kind of question whether my English is as good as hers. And then, so even though you don't fit in, it's a reverse. Like if you're a second generation American accent, even though you don't fit in Taiwan in the same way, it's a privilege not fitting in. Like, I think because of the superiority-inferiority complex that's internalized, right? So you're elite automatically if you're here and with an American education, right? So I guess I'm kind of just asking about the sort of like, in a way, the people who don't come back. I noticed that sometimes they have like a sense of American superiority / Taiwanese inferiority, even though they will claim they love Taiwan, and I'm sure they do. They love Taiwan, and bubble tea's great, and like China don't attack, and like we're the underdog. But when it comes to their own life choices, it's just like, oh, I'll have a better salary in the U.S. Like and I found myself for the first 10 years here wanting to return to the States, like to prove myself almost. Like if I'm successful here, that doesn't mean anything, or like what like I have to be successful back there, or like if I live there, it doesn't matter how great my life is, as long as I live in the U.S., everybody will think I'm successful. Like family, you know what I mean, or people. So I'm just like, I guess it's like a big question about this theme of like superiority inferiority complex and sort of 1.5, you know, and people who come back, who don't come back. Like it's kind of, I don't know, you can take whatever part you feel like commenting on. You know.
Who moved back? What do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah, you guys moved back. What made you want to move back?
I moved back because of broken heart. Distance helps.
And then there's 3 people behind you also moved back?
My family. My family's here.
Yeah, family.
I technically moved back by accident.
Uh-huh.
I thought I left my job and then I thought I was coming back because I visit family every year. So and usually it's only for 2 weeks, you know, during like Christmas. And so I thought, oh, okay, I finally have time to visit for a much longer time. And someone was like, oh, you should check out the job soon, just in case. And long story short, it's been 3 years. And I thought I would be here for 3 months, so.
Actually, a very similar story. We met when we were 8 years old. So we have a lot of similar stories. But I moved back about 1.5 years ago by accident as well, and a broken heart. So I came back just to visit my parents, and then I was supposed to be here for 3 months, and then I broke up with my boyfriend and I didn't want to go back anymore. And what you said really resonated with me because I don't know what the generation is anymore because my parents met in the States and then I was born there, but I moved back here when I was 1.5 and I grew up in TAS. And then when I was 17, I moved to the States, experienced the whole sort of identity crisis, thinking that I was American because I never truly belonged here. But then when I moved there, I wasn't American enough. Then I moved back here last year, and then I wasn't Taiwanese enough. So that was really interesting. Talking about work, I started working at Changgung Hospital, which is like the biggest Taiwanese corporate, hospital job, and I lost my license in the States as a genetic counselor. It doesn't apply here anymore. So I became like super demoted into a research assistant position, trying to do a genetic counseling job. And my Chinese was terrible. I sounded super ABC, and everybody would just be like, why? They were either really amazed that I was from the States, but then I couldn't perform my job properly as a counselor. And then so over the past couple months, I think I really tried so hard to fit in by practicing my Mandarin, and now I feel like I sound very Thai when I speak Mandarin. But then when I have to speak at talks or I have to speak, recently I got featured on a podcast, so I had to speak like professionally in Taiwanese, in Mandarin, and I couldn't do it. It just sounds super ABC all over again, but I can totally speak casually in Taiwanese style Mandarin. So.
And after all this, you still want to stay in Taiwan?
Debating. Yeah, I think it's hard because the profession that I went into, being a genetic counselor, is just so like not here.
Yeah.
It's very much in its infancy. They're trying really hard to bring up that whole genetic testing and counseling mode, but the healthcare system here is completely different. So I don't think that it's going to be something that we would see in this very soon future. And then my salary is also completely unlivable. Yeah.
And how do you feel about Taiwan? Do you feel more belong here?
I think it took a while, but yeah, I feel like I've made friends here that I really like, and then I have both Taiwanese American friends and local Taiwanese friends that I can connect with. It took a lot of time to adjust and find the group of people I like. I had to basically blacklist a lot of people I met at the beginning of my journey here. Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of that, because as someone who's exploring coming back, and I'm so curious about community, right? And so much of mental health and this journey is to have other voices like yours. All of your stories are fantastic. I'm seeing all these possible futures and sort of shared experiences. So I think the question both to Evon and to everyone here is, how did you build community? Where are the places? Is it here? Is it, you know, how did you all, or how are you all stitching together this new fabric, right? And then throwing back to Evon as well is, how do you keep these conversations going? I know you have some course workshops coming up too, and how do you help other groups of us, like, you know, carry on the conversation from today?
This is the Taiwanese American strength. Very good at creating a community on a new land. That is very unique. I think he mentioned New Bloom is a community that you can belong to. I usually do one-on-one counseling and some cross-cultural families as well. So the reason I'm doing this more is because I feel like, wow, a lot of things we're talking about in the room is so important, but only like 2 of us can hear this. Yes. So this is just a trial. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna throw this out and see what happens. If this is important to you and people want to hear more, then I might want to create more this kind of platform for people to get together and share your experiences. Are you interested?
Yes.
Yes. Then we should do more. Yes.
I'm actually exploring a Loose Journey docuseries about Taiwanese Americans moving back. It's just great timing. So maybe in addition, like if everybody wants to leave their email, we can vote, you know, and
They
then
can be
we
your
figure out,
participants
like,
and your interviewees.
yeah, like potentially. Right? I probably can't interview like everyone, but or we can have like group interviews or you know like things that we'll see what happens. But like yeah.
Yes, yes. It's like a reversed affinity group. So when I was in California, I used to have this parent project, talking to first generational parents or immigrant groups. But here in Taiwan, it's like the need is the opposite. We need a affinity group for Taiwanese Americans. And Taiwanese American is also different. Okay, so intersectionally, it's different. Taiwanese American, expats, it's a different community. Biracial children, third cultural children, different community. They have different experiences, they have different voices and journey. That's worth understanding, digging into. Because I hear that a lot in the room and I feel like, oh, how come I'm the only one who can hear this and I cannot share with anyone? Yes.
Hello, thank you. I want to bring this back to earlier you mentioned conditional love. And so I think independent of whether we're talking about Taiwanese Americans or I myself am Chinese American, my family comes from the mainland. But that's a very familiar dynamic for me and the relationship that I have with my parents. And I feel like the last few years, especially as I've tried to educate myself and have these conversations with a therapist, with friends, I've started to understand a lot of my childhood through those lenses, and that's been very empowering for me. As I've tried to have these conversations with my own parents, something that I feel like I've realized is that from their perspective, everything that I view as conditional love, like you should behave in this way and you should make these decisions about your life, your career, they view it as like respect, which is connected to filial piety, self-reference, you also mentioned. And I think that they view it as a lack of respect when I make decisions that I feel like are more authentic to the way that I would want to live my life. And I just feel like that clash just keeps continuing, and I, you know, like I see it as conditional love, they see it as a lack of respect, and I can see it from their perspective too, and so it just feels like we're both right and we're both wrong, and it just keeps going. And so I wonder if you have any advice for that. For just you know, like me being in this lane of like being angry and being hurt by what I view as conditional love, and they're angry and they're hurt too, because they see it from their side as like a lack of respect or you know, rebellious or whatever it is.
It is difficult, but I want to ask other people, what do you think?
I don't think I can answer that, but something I had been wondering recently was I had a great conversation with my sister where she asked me whether I had formally articulated with my dad what I wanted out of my father-son relationship with him, and had imagined what it could be, rather than sort of found myself being mad at him when he didn't meet my invisible and unarticulated expectations for him. And I felt, since then I've felt somewhat of a responsibility to grow that relationship and imagine for myself what I want before I even tell him. Because I think it's really difficult for our parents to think about what we want, because we have an entirely different, how do you say, 思维, like way of thinking than they do. And so like thinking explicitly about what we want, because they don't, like, oftentimes what I assume to be malice is that they just don't know. And so I had never given myself the time to imagine what I wanted that to look like.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers or addresses, but maybe, yeah.
One thing that I talk a lot about with my parents as a bridge is about their relationship with their parents or their in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom is kind of classic situation of having a difficult relationship with her mother-in-law. And, you know, I think that's in a way for us to empathize with each other, to see how much she struggled talking and communicating, connecting emotionally with her parents or her in-laws. And so when I think about generational trauma, it's not a unique phenomenon to our generation. It's probably been harder for my parents' generation. And I try to practice gratitude for how much they do try to show up, you know, in the ways that they can. One of the ways that I measure the health of a parent-child relationship is how many hours or days can you spend with them before you start fighting. And I invite my parents to come travel with me, even though I know it's going to lead to great strife at some point. And it's just chipping away at that. And as I get older, I am the adult in the relationship. You know, I have more resource, I have more patience, I have more perspective. And what's funny is that I'm one of the friends that Dan talks to. And last year we had both of our moms come to Taiwan. And then we had a 2-mom, 2-son dinner at Din Tai Fung. And it was awesome. And it was something that I could have never imagined. Dan and I have been friends for like 20 years now. So that's not something that I could have envisioned when I was younger, that I would have a friendship with my mom or a friendship with my friends' moms. And now I feel capable of that. And I can only imagine that in another 10 years, I'll have other resources and ways of connecting to people who are just generationally very different from me.
Yeah, thank you. But coming back to you, I don't want to minimize that pain, okay? But if this was the therapy room, there was more things that I could do, okay, to validate that experience. But this is not. And, you know, a lot of children, they have this pain and inner struggle. Is it wrong to have this feeling? It's not wrong, it's definitely not wrong. There's no right or wrong feelings. So whatever you're feeling is valid. If you feel it's you're conditionally loved, then you are conditionally loved. Okay. Parents, their generation, you know, there's an analogy. If you're hiking, you're leading people, you're a tour guide, leading people to hike. You cannot lead them to where you haven't been. So our parents' generation, maybe this is beyond their experience, beyond their capacity to do that. So this is like two sides of acceptance. To accept my feelings, but also accept my parents' capability. I really, maybe in my lifetime, I won't have that ideal parent. And I won't, it's a grief. It's a grief we have to accept, yeah, they don't have it, they cannot give it to me. And it's very painful, yes. Yeah, I'll encourage you to talk to someone if you can, because you deserve it. Okay, any other people? I'm curious. If you are not Taiwanese American, what drove you here? What motivated you to come here? Are all of you Taiwanese American?
Yeah, I got this microphone for some reason. No, I'm neither American nor Taiwanese American, nor Taiwanese whatever, I just happen to live here. I mean, I find, in general, I find the experiences of people interesting.
Oh.
And I live here, and I live around Taiwanese people and occasionally Taiwanese Americans. So I'm interested in people's experiences. On top of that, I'm a journalist and I'm working on a project at the moment about mixed race people, mixed race Taiwanese who grew up here, who did not necessarily migrate, but it's a lot of things that are happening in this room that we are discussing happens to people who make similar experiences but in a way from a different side. I see. It's like this shame of this that something about you is inadequate, is something that people in the Vietnamese Taiwanese community, typically the mother is Vietnamese, this is 100% what they experience. And it's just it's very interesting for me to hear something that to hear the experience of other people and to see in how far that resonates, with others who have a different perspective on that, who have different experiences but are in a way similar. And on top of that, I mean, a lot of this intergenerational trauma it goes through Taiwanese and East Asian cultures that plays a role. Migration plays a role. These multiple languages play a role, but at the same time, I can also see myself in that a little bit.
Yes. A lot of things are cross-cultural. Thank you for being here and being interested in this. So, yeah, there's a population, multiracial, multicultural families, multicultural Taiwanese Americans, because I encounter a lot of them in Taiwan in my practice, but we didn't have time to address that part, but they're an important population too. Yeah. Any other people want to share or give feedback?
Yeah, so I'm not Taiwanese American, I'm half Chinese, half American. My mother is from the mainland, and I grew up in China, on the mainland as well. I guess Taiwan has always been kind of like something that I've heard about quite a lot. Maybe I should back a bit. So my father was like a farm boy in Idaho. He grew up Mormon, but his mission was to Taiwan. So he visited here in the early 80s, and I think that was like one of the most like formative experiences in his life, partially because that's kind of what drove him away from the church. But I do hear him talk a lot, or he has a lot of admiration for Taiwanese people and sort of like, their resilience, their work ethic, and well, to an extent, it's beginning to hit me like how much sort of like Mormon values and how much like Taiwanese values rhyme in that way. So I guess like, that's something that really kind of drives his perspective. and my mother's experiences too, like living through the Cultural Revolution as a child, and again rhymes a lot with some of the really traumatic experiences that Taiwanese people went through. So yeah, I'm just, it is beginning to hit me how much like, I guess these sort of experiences and sort of cultural mentalities have really shaped the way that my parents see things, and how that kind of drives a lot of the conflict that I have, that happens in my family. Yeah. So
Thank you for your sharing. I do run into quite a few cross-cultural couples cases, and one of them, parents would come from the Cultural Revolution era. They immigrated because of that reason. So this is amazing how intergenerational trauma can happen, like in today's Taiwan.
yeah, absolutely. I guess there's one more thing to add, which was I was talking to my dad. This is my first time visiting Taiwan, and you know, I talked to my dad quite a bit, asking him like what I should see, you know, like what I should be doing, and it is quite fascinating now that I'm here to realize how much my dad's conception of this country is very much stuck in like the 80s. And I do wonder if that's sort of like a through line with a lot of other, or like people who did flee from Taiwan and are now in the US, and how much their conception of Taiwan is stuck in the 80s versus.
That's normal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Capsule. I want to add one thing. We also have early immigrants to Brazil, South America, and South Africa. Quite a few Taiwanese there, and the second and third generation might come back too. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
So I guess I just wanted to touch on the topic again of mixed race identities, being someone who's a mixed race, and yeah, either like I think it would be nice to have some sort of forum about that, because I feel like as a mixed race person, this feeling of not being accepted, like anywhere you are, is like very common. And so, and then if you add the layer too of one of your parents is an immigrant, so yeah,
Other
I think that would-
intersectionalities.
yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes. And what drove you here today?
I think trying to understand my family history more. This is my first time living in Taiwan for an extended period of time. My mom immigrated when she was 22.
From Taiwan?
From Taiwan. And I've only been here a few times throughout my life.
Okay. So what did you take away from today?
Some of the kind of history pieces you mentioned resonated, but I feel like a lot of it was like me doing my own research to understand Taiwanese history, and then kind of asking my mom like what her experience was, and trying to understand my grandma's history as well. So I think it was validating to hear some of these like common experiences that other Taiwanese Americans have.
Yeah, I really admire you. I want to acknowledge, you know, you guys care about Taiwan's history and old people more than Taiwanese people. So this will be like educational trauma. If I give the same talk in Mandarin to Taiwanese people, no one would talk. I have to talk exactly for 2 hours, because if I say, oh, any questions, do you want to respond to this? Silence. So thank you for being who you are. This is really great.
I'm actually, being part of my job is like intercultural coaching and training, and so I just wanted to add that, like your question back there is like, there's lots of, like what you said just now as well, there's just major cultural differences. Like there's a whole field called intercultural communication, so that includes like how to love, includes how to behave, like show up in a public space, it includes lots of things, and so what we might experience, like part of what I've learned as well in my own life, what I misinterpreted as disrespect or like lack of love or a lot of things was a misunderstanding of a different framework. So sometimes understanding just like a different framework can help heal as well. So I just wanted to add that. And also a third culture kid myself, so third culture is yeah, very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I really appreciated discovering this space. It's really nice to see other people from this similar multicultural background. It was really nice and very thankful for my friend here for introducing me to this event after meeting for like a minute. You know, before this, the only space I felt like I could find people who had similar stories and I guess experiences I could relate to, and I'm here, but mostly just my usual drinking holes. You know, and it's not always the same, you know, dealing with expats and other language speaking cultures, but meeting people from similar multicultural backgrounds, it's a nice feeling, and I'm real thankful for finding this place.
Wow. Thank you.
I think it sounds like you need to organize a new meetup. Yeah, new drinking meetup. Or end up on
There's
a-
beer upstairs.
Oh, there's beer upstairs.
I have something to say about another space that people can gather in. I know that when I came here almost 8 years ago, one of the best places for me to find friends was at karaoke. And what I mean is not the kind of place where you already take people that you know, but like there are a few places that have karaoke based off of YouTube, and so you can just sing the songs that you already know. There's Barcade, and then there's the Mary Jane Pizza.
And then karaoke.
We met at karaoke. Yeah, it's something that I consider that I got from my parents. They would get together with other Asian immigrants in Alabama and sing karaoke. And then coming here, it's still very much within me to sing to my friends, and maybe you guys got the bug too, so you can come sing. That's a good way to find your friends.
And food is always the best way to make friends. Food in Taiwan. You want to say something?
Oh, no, I'm good. But how are you doing? It's about.
Okay, so it's 9:10 already. So thank you so much for participating. If you want to stay, you're welcome to stay.
If you guys want to stay, they have a bar upstairs or something. Other drinks and stuff, and yeah.
I will stay here for
always
another
feel
hour or
free to
so.
just,
So if you guys want to talk, we can exchange contacts.
Yeah.
Okay, for future events.
Or go upstairs and just hang out, and any contributions, all the drinks and stuff. It just goes to the space, it's a really important space to carry. I mean, this is a safe space that there's a lot of talks on human rights issues and stuff. So if you can support, fantastic. Okay, but thank you all for coming. This is great.
Thank you.